Welcome, everybody, and thank you all for coming tonight. I'm Jenny Raitt. I'm the Director of Planning and Community Development for the town of Arlington. And I'm joined by Kelly Linema, who's the Senior Planner on our team. We also have some members of the Housing Plan Implementation Committee with us this evening, and we may be joined by many other officials as well. So I want to recognize them if I can, but I too don't have everybody right in front of me in the room or on the screen right at this moment. But I will say welcome to everybody. Thank you so much for being here tonight. This is the first of other opportunities to engage in the housing plan process. Some of you may know, but I want to share with you that the Arlington Master Plan, which was adopted by the Arlington Redevelopment Board, which is the town's planning board, as well as the select board, their endorsement, and endorsed also by town meeting in 2015, includes a housing element. It's one of the many different chapters of that plan. And our department, as well as the Master Plan Implementation Committee, actively implements that master plan. The first recommendation in the housing element was for the town to create a housing plan and submit it to the state for approval, because the state recommends that all communities have a 5-year housing plan. And you'll hear more about that tonight. We began that action step soon thereafter and completed our current plan in 2016, which is still technically active. But we're here tonight to begin the planning for the next 5 years. As you also might know, we are also creating this plan on the heels of other short and longer range planning work for the town to achieve, for example, net zero by 2050, and to create a more equitable and sustainable transportation system. Tomorrow night as well, we will be discussing open space and recreation as part of a separate planning process. Even though these are different planning processes, we envision them as all integrating together and being important in overlapping goals and strategies. So we have already heard much from many of you already about the importance of some of the things that are tied to those many other planning processes in relationship to housing. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn it over to Judy Barrett. She is from the Barrett Planning Group. She's going to introduce her team and discuss the ground rules, describe tonight's agenda, and begin the presentation. So with that, let's begin the work of planning and working together to keep Arlington an affordable and welcoming place to live for present and the future in Arlington. Thank you so much.
So thank you, Jenny. Alexis, can you go to the next slide? So as Jenny said, I'm Barrett Planning Group. I'm one of actually 3 of us here this evening from my firm. Alexis Lanzalotta, who's actually managing the slides here, is in the meeting, as is Fiona Coughlin, both of whom will be available to assist with facilitating the breakout sessions that you'll see later in this meeting. We also have with us 4 of our colleagues from Horsley Witten Group, who some of you may know. They are also working on the town's open space plan, and they too will be assisting with facilitating breakout sessions this evening, as needed. Next slide, please. So we have a pretty busy agenda here for a meeting that needs to end around 8 o'clock. So we've done the introductions. I'm going to sort of explain a little bit about this meeting and how we're going to operate. We're going to give you a pretty quick overview of what we've been doing so far, just so you have a sense of where we are in this process. The bulk of tonight is really going to be 3 breakout groups, 3 discussion sessions, which all of you will be able to participate in. Those breakout sessions will be kind of randomly assigned when we get to that point. Then that will be your opportunity to communicate with us. In the meantime, while we're doing our presentation here, we just ask that you stay kind of on mute so that we can move through this quickly. Alexis, if you could go to the next slide, please. So keep your microphone on mute, as I said. You'll have time to communicate during the breakout group. If you have questions for us, you may use the chat function to put them there. We're going to do our best to monitor the chat and to either respond during the meeting or in writing afterwards. Your questions will be saved and we will respond one way or another. If you have more that you want to say to us about the breakout sessions after this meeting, there will be a link later in the meeting to a Google form with the very same questions we're going to be presenting in the breakout sessions, so you can say more to us if there's just simply not enough time this evening. Shall we move on to the next slide? Mm-hmm. So the timeline, I'm going to discuss this again toward the end of this meeting, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time in this now, except to point out that we are early in this process, which is part of why we're having this meeting now. It's so that we'll have an opportunity to hear from you and take your thoughts into account as we continue to do research and think about the analysis that we're doing for the plan. Ultimately, what we're trying to get to in terms of a target date is to have a final draft of the plan available sometime in October for presentation to the Housing Committee and the Planning Department. The final plan would be presented to the Select Board and ARB and, excuse me, Arlington Redevelopment Board, and then ultimately submission to the Department of Housing and Community Development, hopefully by the end of November. So that's roughly the timeline that we're working with. Next slide, please. So the kind of plan that we have been asked to prepare has several components. First of all, it's one that would need to be eligible for approval by the Department of Housing and Community Development. This is really our charge from the town. This is what the town has asked us to do. A plan that's realistic in your market area, helps to address the needs for affordable housing, is equitable across all income levels, and discourages concentrations of affordable housing in any particular area of town. Next slide. The plan has three key components: a housing needs assessment, goals, and then implementation strategies. The goals are really of two types. One is quantitative, like how many units the town would be hoping to create over the 5 years of the plan. And the other part of it is more qualitative, which is the types of housing that you would hope to see created for the people who need affordable housing as part of meeting those goals. The needs assessment is what we're working on right now. Next slide. What we've done so far, we've created a community engagement plan for this process. We've met with the Housing Plan Implementation Committee once. We held group interviews over 3 days in May, and also provided a sort of a kickoff questionnaire for participants to respond to. We toured the town on June 1st, and this map that you see is kind of where we were. So we've been through a lot of the town, certainly not every single neighborhood. But if you follow the lines on that map, the lightest colors are sort of where we started and dark is kind of where we ended up. So that was the tour that we did. We've been conducting demographic and market research data at this point. We're not done, but we're in that step. We're looking at market trends and, of course, reviewing your existing plans, your other plans that relate to this plan. Next slide. So I want to just share with you very briefly some of what we've learned so far, because this is going to inform the kinds of questions we're going to ask you in the breakout sessions. But I want you to know what we've heard. And of course, a key part of this meeting is for us to understand, have we kind of heard things that are resonant for you? Are there things that you think we haven't heard yet that you really think we need to hear? So we're going to go through these fairly quickly, because again, we need to get to the discussion part of the meeting, but here we go. Alexis, if you could go to the next slide. So we asked people, why Arlington? Why are you here? Why are you in this community? What do you love about Arlington? And people told us a variety of things. It's close to Boston and Somerville and Cambridge. There's access to transit and a bicycle path. It's walkable. It has great schools. It's relatively affordable compared to some of the neighboring communities. And most people said they would really like to stay in town if they can. It's kind of an urban suburban hybrid. It has like these very different physical forms as you go through the community. Those quotes that you see on the slide are examples of the kinds of things that people said to us when we asked this question. Next slide, please. We asked what has changed over time. And these are the kinds of things that we heard from people. The town has become less economically diverse. There's a decreased sense of community. Renovations and teardowns are common as property values continue to increase. And some people told us they had seen an increase in homelessness. If you go to the next slide, there are some examples of the kinds of quotes we heard. Some people said, we're talking about three sort of towns kind of globbed into one. Every year you need a larger income just to stay here. And of course, the opposite of being less diverse is the town's becoming more economically similar. Used to be a wider range of incomes, but that's slowly disappearing. Next slide, please. We asked people what they thought about the town's housing needs, especially affordability. People said we need more housing for households that are at 80% of the median income for the region. For purposes of this presentation, I'm going to call that moderate income housing. But other people said we need more deeply affordable housing too for people who really are very low income and have absolutely no prayer of finding housing in this town that they can afford. Home ownership options for seniors who choose to stay in Arlington and want to downsize, starter homes for young people, condominiums or apartments for families, missing middle stuff, meaning kind of a range of smaller sort of duplex, three family, 4 to 6 unit kind of housing, smaller units within existing buildings, congregate housing, and then cooperative co-housing and other models of kind of living together. So those are examples of things that people shared with us when we asked the question, what about housing needs? Next slide, please. So as part of the sort of survey process and continuing to gather input from people, we heard these kinds of concerns. And again, we're going to give you an opportunity to tell us whether you agree or disagree with these comments when we get a little bit later in this meeting. But we've heard that we've overconstrained ourselves and we ought to do a little more to take down barriers. Why don't developers make more affordable units? Well, it's financially difficult to do that without the economics in place. We need to put myths in the context of what you gain. You don't end up with a tax negative, you don't crowd schools, but you do get business patrons and more diversity. That was a particular perspective that we heard. Next slide, please. We can't expand the town's borders, so we have to change zoning. We know not everybody agrees with that, but that was an example of something we heard. Another person said there's a lot of misinformation out there about housing, that there's enough of a safety net for Arlington residents, but that isn't always the case. Some people wondered if folks actually knew what they were talking about. You know, do you really know what sort of affordable housing needs are? And that people need a general history and a lesson of zoning in Arlington and around the country, and the ways in which the regulatory practices have contributed to a perpetuation of race and class barriers in the greater Boston area. Next slide, please. The Horsley Witness Group is going to cover briefly some challenges that we heard about as we did those group interviews that I mentioned earlier. So Jeff, I'm going to turn it over to you at this point.
Thank you, Judy. And looks like I have 2 minutes until we're supposed to move on to the group.
You have
discussion.
5. You have 5.
All right. I will take my 5 and I'll try to be very brief. So this is not a whole lot of new information. We really heard a lot of the same challenges from you all that were reported back in the current housing production plan from 2016. So first of all, most new housing development is going to be redevelopment. And every change is visible throughout your neighborhoods. Every tear down has a neighbor. Next slide, please. In terms of environmental assets, of course, there are areas of town that are prone to constrictions or protections. 15% of the town is part of a flood zone. 11% is either water or protected open space. And you have several contaminated sites that could be redeveloped with a little love. Next slide, please. In terms of your infrastructure, roads and transportation, one important thing to note is that the Connect Arlington Long Range Plan will soon be done. And that is part of Arlington's continual work on roadway improvements. You do, compared to your neighbors, have strong bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure. You also have pretty good MBTA bus service, but it should be expanded to ease traffic. In terms of capacity at your schools, it was projected that enrollment should peak in 2020, and the town is continuing to monitor that. Next slide, please. So there are several challenges in terms of cost of construction. I mean, in brief, the cost of construction has been going up over the last 10 years. Over the past year in particular, it has skyrocketed. And job growth in Greater Boston has been far outpacing housing growth. So there are a lot of pressures all across the Boston region on the housing market that are out of your control, but that the town does play a part in addressing. Next slide, please. So then in terms of zoning, in your commercial zones is where you have a lot of opportunity for mixed use additions above existing commercial buildings. That has been something in the past the town has said it would like to pursue. But there are, of course, some barriers to actually making that happen. Your existing zoning, your parking regulations, open space requirements, setbacks, and the permitting process, et cetera, make it challenging to redevelop commercial buildings into mixed use. Industrial, of course, you all recently passed an effort to allow limited artist housing and live work space in some of your industrial zones. And thinking about that issue moving forward, both for your commercial and industrial districts, there's going to continue to need to balance housing and housing diversity with the desire to maintain enough areas for commercial and industrial development in order to maintain a diverse tax base. Next slide, please. So in terms of residential zoning and development, and let's be honest, zoning is complex, and that's not unique to Arlington. There is limited land zoned throughout the town that allows more than 1 or 2 family homes. Special permits are required for almost every type of housing other than 1 and 2 family homes, which can be a barrier in terms of time and money and uncertainty in the process. Building height is generally 35 feet or so throughout the town, with a few exceptions, which can be a barrier to housing diversity. You also have a minimum lot area per unit, which in general is a disincentive for developers to construct smaller units. And then parking requirements, you have made progress in that respect in your commercial corridors in particular, and that's great, but there are still some areas where parking could be a challenge to the types of housing that are needed. Next slide, please. Another challenge are your open space requirements. A lot of them are designed for more suburban style development on larger lots, but where the town has said that you want to see housing diversity, so in your major corridors and along areas near transit, that's a more urban environment. So perhaps those open space requirements don't really line up with what you want. And then in terms of building height next to lower density residential, again, these corridors where you want to see housing diversity tend to abut lower density 1, 2 family neighborhoods, making it difficult, if not impossible, to get the building height that you would need for that type of redevelopment. Next slide, please. And this is my last slide. I think I'm in my 5 minutes. Environmental design review, special permits. Of course, the ARB plays a really important role in planning, managing, and regulating development in Arlington. And we want to continue to support that. But at the same time, we do have to acknowledge that the special permit process can add time, cost, and uncertainty. And then finally, inclusionary zoning, which you've had in place for 20 years, along with a number of other communities in the region. You require 15% of housing units in certain developments to be affordable. And while this does help integrate affordable housing throughout the town, it could be adjusted to be more effective. So over the past 20 years, the bylaw has produced 62 units, and 3 are currently under construction. And with that, I will turn it back over to Judy.
Oh, Judy, you're muted. There we
Yeah,
go.
I've got it now. Thank you. So we are going to move into breakout sessions so that we can have discussions with people at a more manageable size. I'm going to kind of explain to you how the breakout sessions will work. And then you'll get a message pretty soon asking you to join a particular session. So Alexa, if you can just go to the next slide. So you'll be assigned at random. Kelly is going to handle that process. We have several facilitators, although I erroneously listed Fiona Coughlin, who is actually not going to be joining us tonight, but I don't think we need that many facilitators anyway. You're going to be given a 2-minute warning to wrap up before we move attendees to the next breakout session. So You'll join a session. We'll go through probably it's about 3 questions per discussion. The facilitators will explain to you what we need to do, but essentially you're going to be given a question at a time to respond to and move on to the next question. When that 2-minute wrap up warning comes, people will literally need to wrap up because we're going to move right along to the next breakout session. And so you'll get a message saying join group, whatever, and that means you're going to be joining a new group. You may be with the same facilitator, you may not. You may be with the same people, you may not. Again, it's entirely random. And then we'll be reconvened at the end of that process to just kind of do a look at next steps in the process so that you know what to anticipate coming forward. So I think at that point, we're ready to do the breakout groups, Kelly.
Okay, great. Here we go. So you'll get an invitation and please accept and you'll move into the group. Okay, I think everyone's back. So I'm going to hand this back over to Judy and Alexis. Oh, Judy, you're on mute.
I know.
Oh, sorry.
I just saw it. Alexis, do you want to bring the slides up again?
Sure
Super.
thing.
Well, let's go down to where we are. Okay, so next steps. Next steps are simply this. We have a lot of work to do. We're continuing to do research and looking at market data and demographic data, and we have more talking to do with people. I think that sort of toward the end of the summer, we'll be producing kind of a draft of the needs assessment, kind of with everything that we learned, both from you folks this evening, from our research, from other kind of conversations with the community. If you go to the timeline, Alexis, that would probably help.
Sure. Sorry, I was having
It's fine.
technical difficulties.
Well, I know I had my share tonight too. So this again is the timeline. I know you saw this before. There is this discussion coming, a community conversation sponsored by your Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Office on fair housing that's coming up on July 13th. And you may want to check the town website if you're interested to find out about that event. From our point of view, it's really working on this needs assessment over the summer and developing what we think are plausible goals to submit to the planning department for discussion with the Housing Plan Implementation Committee. Around in September, there will be another community engagement forum to kind of vet the things that we think that we found that we are thinking might make sense for this plan. There will be, another forum when the housing plan is essentially in all draft form. And then eventually what happens toward the end of the fall is that the plan is presented to the Arlington Redevelopment Board and the Select Board, because both those boards have to approve the plan in order for the plan to be submitted to the Department of Housing and Community Development. So there's quite a bit, left to do here. We're certainly not done yet. And Kelly, did you have something that you were trying to add up there? I'm sorry, I don't want to cut you off.
No, I'm sorry.
Okay. There will be the town has a webpage sort of for this project. And one of the things, if you're interested, if you have more that you want to say to us that you didn't get a chance to say this evening, if you go to that page, there will be a link to a Google form that will take you to the same questions you saw in the discussion, the breakout sessions tonight. And you will be able to tell us more that, if you have thoughts after this meeting that perhaps you didn't get a chance to present or that you've thought about, sometimes when I walk away from a discussion, I think, why didn't I say that? Well, if you have a why didn't I say that moment, you'll be able to kind of say it in that Google form, and we will get those comments. So that's really where we are and kind of where we're going. And I think really that's it, Alexis, if you want to take us to the final slide here. We want to thank you for participating. Jenny, did you or Kelly, do you want to kind of close out, or are we just going to sign off at this point and say thank you very much?
Jenny, I'm just happy to close out. I did post a link to the Housing Plan Implementation Committee website in the chat. We will also be following up shortly with a press release, a link to the recording, and the slides, which will all be posted on the Housing Plan Implementation Committee website. Jenny can add to this if she wants to, but I just want to thank everyone for taking the time to come out, and I hope everyone felt like they had a productive discussion. I'm really looking forward to hearing a summary of everything that was discussed. Jenny?
Sure. Thank you, everybody, for participating. This is really the beginning of the process, and we would love to hear any feedback from you. That's the point of participating with the Google form or in any other medium that you would like to communicate with us so that we can understand a little bit more about your ideas for the plan as it's evolving and developing. The timeline and all of the other materials, as Kelly and others have noted, is on the website. We are going to have a summary of the entire meeting, as well as the recording and any other report outs posted and available hopefully early next week. And we'll be looking forward to following up with you. I know that there are many, many more voices in Arlington who would be wonderful to participate in this plan. If you know somebody else, how about everybody in this meeting, please share this information with 5, 10, 15, as many people as possible to get them to participate and be part of this process. And if there are other people who you'd like to bring in, just let us know. We'd be happy to follow up. We really appreciate your time tonight and your energy. And I think that's all. Thank you very much.
Oh, Jennifer, yes, feel free to share that. I see your question about filling out the form. Yes, there's a direct question about if you attended the meeting or not. I'm sorry, Jenny, I didn't mean to cut you off. I just want to make sure that that was addressed, that can be shared with anybody.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. Good night, everybody.